Good afternoon, everyone. While we're waiting to get started, we're going to wait just a few moments. You could go ahead and answer the question on the screen in the chat. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. Again, good afternoon. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. You could go ahead and answer the question on the screen in the chat. Okay, you can continue to answer that question in the chat. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Mallory Roth, and I'm the Director of Programming here at the Columbus Chamber. We really appreciate all of you joining us today for our Columbus Wins info session. Columbus Wins is the Chamber's newest program, launching this June. Over the next hour, you will have the opportunity to hear from our instructor and learn more about this new program. Columbus Wins will consist of 10 classes being held from June to October. All classes will take place at the Cohatch in Upper Arlington on Lane Avenue from 10 till noon. So as you have questions throughout this session, please feel free to add them to the chat and then we will get to those. So it is now my pleasure to introduce you to James Rores. During the first 15 years of his career, James was a top producer of sales leader for 8 venture-backed companies, contributed to 5 exits, and burned out on the last day of his best year. After hiring a coach and learning to align the core values of sales and servant leadership, James would commit the rest of his career to sharing those lessons with as many sales and customer-facing professionals as possible. Today, his lessons are shared through the WINS model and the unique experiences of more than 27,000 graduates from over 7,500 organizations worldwide. James is ready to help you and your teams win bigger, sell stronger, and compete smarter. Thank you, James, for being with us today, and I'll let you take it away.
Wow, that was great. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing, but I'd like everybody to continue if you're jotting into the chat the answer to the question, what buyer behaviors frustrate you most? And I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see you when I'm sharing. So I want to see everyone's lovely face, and I see everybody's pictures. If you guys want to participate, hey, Marissa.
Hi,
Thank you,
how are you?
Natalie. Hi. So if you guys want to participate and share your screen, that'd be great. What I'd like to do is you're all on mute, and we're going to have an interactive session here. So as we go through this, if you want to participate, raise your hand, jot something into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get you involved. So I'm going to do my best to get through the meat of this in the first half hour and provide some half hour to 40 minutes and provide some opportunity at the end for Q&A. So if you have general questions about the program, save those for the end. We'll make sure we have time to go through that. As I'm looking at all the great chat answers, let's see. One response from David. Not getting responses on proposals when all areas have been covered and their questions and concerns have been addressed. That if we were on Family Feud, that might get like near 100%, right? If everybody would have guessed that. That's a great one. I'd like you guys to think about this. Think of, as we go through this, think of the proposal as a as a gift. So think of this idea of Christmas morning, and I work on my lighting here. Think of Christmas morning, and think of the anticipation, or birthday, or anticipating a trip, a vacation. You're never more excited than before you open it, or than before you go on that vacation. That's the idea with sales, and especially a proposal. Think of the proposal as a gift. And then remember what you were like as a kid after you opened the gifts, right? You were playing with the boxes. So I think the idea here is that we want to make sure the proposal is saved and treated like something that is precious, not something that's easily given away. We'll talk more about that. Um, gathering pricing info, gathering pricing or info prior to be ready to make a decision. So yeah, so the buyer behavior focused on pricing, focused on features and functions, and we know that they do that because they're trying to compare you to someone else. So think about how your process positions you to be entered into, a shopping spree, right? We want to avoid that. We want to avoid the tendency to feed into our customers' desire to shop. We want them to look at us as a unique service provider, as a unique opportunity. When potential buyers say they want they want what you have, then they don't buy. Thanks, Shelley. Yeah. So you got what's really cool about being in sales, gang, is that we are all buyers as well. So we all know what it's like to buy something, and then we all have to kind of deal with people who do the same things that we do, right? So we know we're really not interested in buying something. We'll feign interest to get people to, or get that salesperson to give us the information that we seek. It's really up to the salesperson to make sure that we're qualified. So we'll make sure that you guys leave today with a good sense of how we can help you do that. Indecisiveness or unnecessary stalling, so a lack of urgency. Um, they already have enough information to make a decision, but delays with excuses like, I need to think about it, or we're getting more bids, or I have to pass it around the organization, those kinds of things that cause delays. So what we find oftentimes is that we rush to the proposal because the buyer gives us cues that say, oh, they must be ready. But we really haven't collected the evidence that lets us know they are prepared to make a decision. Well, we want to make sure that we're never giving folks information about what we have to offer, what we would call a recommendation. We would suggest you never propose. Instead of proposing, you're recommending, but you never give a recommendation unless the buyer can tell you exactly who's going to be involved in that decision and when they expect to have that decision. And we can talk more about that. All right. Anybody else have any? Let's see if anybody else had anything else. A lot of folks agreeing with other folks. Excellent. So I'm gonna start the program, gang. But as I said, we have someone monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, I'm gonna do my best not to go so fast I don't see them. Just so everybody who's helping us administer this, just so you guys know, as soon as I start sharing, I'm not going to be able to see any interface. So if there is a chat or a request, don't hesitate to interrupt me audibly, and I'll make sure I slow down. All right, rock and roll. Let me share out. All right, gang. So what we are what we promised to do today was to give you a sense of what the Columbus Wins program is all about. If you've seen my video, um, you've you're already aware of the fact that we are offering a 100% money back guarantee on this training. You've heard me say that when I start trainings, typically I'm training a team of salespeople. They weren't the ones that purchased the training; their employer typically did, and so I now have to build credibility when they meet me, sometimes for the first time in the first session. And so my normal response is that if, well, in that context, my comments are, your boss hired me, but you can fire me. And I think that's something that I want you guys to think about as you think about whether or not you want to participate in this program. I know that every one of you has been through sales training that has been less than inspiring, less than useful. I spent 15 years struggling with that myself. I had to do most of my learning through books and simply observing and figuring things out on my own. What I want to make sure Columbus Wins is for you is not one of those experiences. So part of the reason that we're offering the guarantee is I want to create an anticipation for myself that I'll be held accountable. I also want you to enter the program with a feeling that you can be free to simply jump into the material, and that at any time of the program, during the program, if you have a concern that can't be addressed, you're not obligated to continue. And so it holds everyone accountable, and it will make for a much better experience. And if you have any questions about that later, please let me know. When we ask that question, what buyer behavior would you love to change? Here is a list of some of the common things that we hear from folks. And the way that I view the world is, if a training program can't address these issues systematically and programmatically over time, not just once or twice, but if I can't give you a system to consistently eliminate these challenges from your experience, then I've failed. And so that's really the standard that Columbus Wins was built to. And that's the standard that the Wins program has been built to over the years. So what we're going to talk about today is not necessarily that this is not like a Vulcan mind meld. This is not like a Jedi mind trick, right? So we're not approaching this process as one where you will somehow convince buyers that their priorities are not important, or that you're somehow going to use psychological tools to influence how they show up. Um, what we're going to do is we're simply going to we're going to spend more time understanding the buyer, where they're coming from. And what I want to do is really adjust the way that you show up. I want to adjust the mindset that you bring to a buying conversation. And I want to help you think about this idea that buyers will respond to you. So there's a cause and effect relationship between a seller and a buyer. And the challenge is that the more transactional you appear, and in some contexts, you can say the more salesy you are. In other contexts, you can say the more the buyer experiences your commission breath. Has anybody ever heard that phrase before? Commission breath? Yeah, the more the buyer experiences that transactional nature, or your desire to move quickly to a deal, the more likely they're going to resist. So there are two types of salespeople in the world. There are transactional sellers, and there are growth multipliers. And today we're going to be talking about how to recognize whether or not you have the characteristics of a transactional seller, and how you can make that shift to a growth multiplier. Um, the I think the big thing to take away from this, and we'll talk more about this as we move through the program, is that we can't blame ourselves entirely for the way that we show up, right? Because in many cases, we have been trained by our buyers, right? How many of you would, if we could do it now, take a poll? How many of you would classify your buyers as transactional? When they show up, do they kind of try to force you into that transactional niche? We call that the transactional trap. And what we're going to do today is is identify that trap and help you avoid it or escape it and make sure that you're able to take the lead and take control of our buying conversations so that you don't become a victim of that trap and so you can step out of that transactional seller role. Any comments or questions, uh, please jot them into the chat. So the challenge here is that even great sellers get dragged into bad sales conversations. So what I'd like you guys to think about, the first mindset shift I want you to make is I want you to think about your role and the mindset that you carry into a conversation. And I'd like you to resist this idea of thinking of yourself as a seller or a salesperson or your job as selling. I'd like you to think about how just that mindset creates or positions you to be more transactional, right? We can't show up and assume that the buyer understands that this is a transaction. The problem with doing that is that it commoditizes us and it commoditizes our conversation. It devalues us, it devalues the conversation, it devalues our company, devalues our products and services. So we have to resist this idea of thinking of ourselves as having a sales conversation. I want you guys to think about it instead of instead of thinking of yourself as selling, I want you to think of yourself as helping people buy. That's the first mindset shift I'd like you to think about. Why do I do that? Well, we talk a lot about this idea of being customer centric. And when you think about the definition of of that buying decision, I'd like you to think of it this way. People buy when they're ready, willing, and able to change. The decision to make a purchase is a decision to change. And if you think about your own experience with change, right, would you say that change is easy or hard? Right? Well, what's interesting is that, of course, we all intellectually know that growth is the mastery of change. We can't grow unless we change. But we know when we're not growing. When we're not growing, we're failing, and that's not an indication of our mastery. We know we have to take another shot, learn a few things, but we know that when we're growing, we're actually mastering change. So because of that, change brings risk, right? So if people buy when they're ready, willing, and able to change, another way to think about that is that people buy when they're able to overcome the perceived risk of that decision. So if you guys think about this, the reason that buyers treat you in a transactional manner is that they think that's the way to reduce their risk. They think that if they can have minimum interaction with you, that you're not going to be able to convince them to make a decision they don't want to make. You're not going to be able to, use psychology and other tactics to manipulate them. Right? That's the fear. But every one of you knows that when buyers do that, they actually create more risk for themselves, don't they? Because they're not availing themselves of your expertise. So when I encourage you to think about your role as helping people buy, I want you to think about your role as contributing to the expertise of that buyer so that you can help them achieve their ultimate goal, which is a successful buying decision. Notice how, as you think this way, notice how your mindset shifts. All of a sudden, you're not showing up thinking about what you can get out of that conversation. You're not thinking about your quota. You're not thinking about your commission. You're not looking past the buyer as an obstacle or an objection to getting what you want, right? In the most extreme sense, that seller who has commission breath is a seller who views the buyer as an obstacle to signature, right? How can I get around the gatekeeper, right? How can I get above somehow this lower level buyer who isn't the decision maker, but who's also blocking me from the decision maker. If you have the mindset of helping people buy, it'll start to reveal to you that all of the opposition that we think we experience from buyers can be shifted immediately from opposition to a partnership relationship. And that's what we're after. I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask if anybody has any comments or reactions, pushback to anything that I've said so far, or maybe even agreement.
James, we have a question. It says,
Yeah.
what strategy do you recommend for going past the gatekeeper?
Ah, who did that? Who asked me that? Raise your hand so I can see you. Okay, nobody that's sharing their picture. Okay. So gang, it's a great question. So here's the challenge for you, and here's the next step in the process. So after I've explained everything, this idea and this mindset of helping people buy, I want you to think about the implication for the conversation with that individual that you want to get around, right? If you think about helping that individual, regardless of whether they're a decision maker, make a buying decision, then what you're doing is you're giving yourself the opportunity to turn that person into your champion. If someone's talking to you in the midst of a buying cycle for an organization, a B2B organization, chances are they have something at risk. Chances are if they recommend you and you're the wrong person, they have something at risk. If the decision maker makes a decision and you're the wrong person, they have something at risk. If you're the right person, maybe their life gets a lot easier. So the mistake we make is that we think the only person to talk to is a decision maker. Or the mistake we make is to think about, look, this person in front of me is an obstacle. I'll tell you what, if you can turn that person into a champion, in other words, if you can find out what problem they have and what's in it for them, which is what the wins methodology is all designed to do, then you can turn that person into a champion. They will see immediately how you can help them get what they want, especially if they're not a decision maker, especially if there's someone that's lower in the totem pole who may be using your tool, using your service, or their job may be dependent upon their success may be dependent upon the right decision being made by the decision maker. Identify their feeling of risk, help them recognize you as a solution to their challenge. Then guess what happens? They're going to champion you inside the organization. If they don't have power and control over the buying decision, they will at least help you along the way. They'll coach you through the buying process, because now your success is their success. And when we think about applying wins, we think about a conversation framework that allows us to have that kind of a conversation with every buyer we meet. And the rule for the wins model is that every time you create a champion, right, you get rid of a competitor. So the more champions you have in a buying center, the fewer competitors you'll face. And that's really one of the core secrets to the success of the wins model. I'll let whoever asked the question let me know if I answered it appropriately. Hopefully that resonates with you all. Anybody else have a challenge or a comment or a question that I can address? You can see we're already 25 minutes in and we haven't gotten very far. I do like to make sure I'm giving you what you need versus just getting through my slides, but I will endeavor to speed up because I know you all have things to do today. So let's go back and we'll keep sharing this out. But please don't hesitate to raise a
James,
question.
real
Yeah,
quick, we have one more question. What's
yeah,
your recommendation for selling when the product service is nice to have, but the
yeah,
buyer doesn't have a strong need for it and
yeah,
they aren't actively searching for the product service?
yeah. There's two things to think about there, gang. So if you're talking to someone who thinks you're a nice to have, the the rule we have, and you'll go through this during the wins training. We will actually walk you through what we term as the always buyer persona. So the always buyer persona is the buyer for whom your product or service is a must-have. So the challenge that salespeople endure is the misalignment between marketing and sales. Now, this is not me saying marketing has a problem. What I'm saying is that sales is a team sport. So the reason that Wins is a model for sales and customer facing teams is because it serves as a model for the entire revenue engine: branding, marketing, sales, customer experience, and the product service package. Why? Because every one of us has to know the definition of a buyer who views us as a must have. So I'll tell you, if you're talking to a lot of folks who view you as a nice to have, it may be right that you're cold calling, emailing, prospecting, networking to people who will never see you as a must have because you're talking to the wrong folks. And without that clear definition, you're going to be at risk. Your organization's going to be at risk. Your marketing dollars are going to be at risk. You'll be wasting time. Your pipeline will be at risk. The next thing I would say to you is that once you have the always buyer persona and you're aligned with marketing, now as you're networking, as you're doing your own prospecting, you can also qualify those buyers because now you know exactly what those always buyers look like and you can qualify much more effectively. So now your pipeline becomes much richer, much more predictable, much higher value. And I'm going to give you a third way to solve the problem. When you have the always buyer persona, now you can tell a buyer under what circumstances they will view you as a must have. So, have you ever had someone ask you, hey, Kelly, who's your ideal customer? Right? It's important to be able to tell a buyer who your ideal customer is. And then follow it up with a question, right? Do you see any of the same issues and characteristics occurring in your business? Do you anticipate your business dealing with similar challenges in the future? And if they say no, and you know that they're not being thoughtful about it, you can say, are you sure? Because every other business I've talked to who looks like yours is considering or should be considering these challenges that are coming in the future. Are you sure it makes sense to not be thinking about these today? Are you sure you're better off by not addressing these or at least talking about it today? So that last point is it relates to how the WINS model will teach you to lead your buyers to change, right? One of the things I don't like about the concept of discovery is it makes us feel like all we can do is discover what's happening inside the business and that's it. We're going to teach you to discover and to disrupt, right? How many times have you talked to buyers that really didn't know what was in their best interest? Because they don't know what they don't know. It's your job to understand where they are, but also because you're helping them buy, you know what risks are coming for them. You know what needs they haven't identified yet, and you can share that with them. And so what you're doing by thinking this way is you're positioning yourself not as a salesperson, but as a guide, as a consultant, as a coach, right? As a growth multiplier, someone who, for everyone that you work with, is a multiplier in terms of driving growth and health for the organizations that you sell to. So some of the statistics I think we all need to be concerned about, gang, this idea of selling in a transactional way creates an opportunity cost that's shared by salespeople and employers alike. I gave some statistics on my video, but you can also think about this idea that, even if you're a top producer, 50% of top producers fail to replicate past successes within new employers. And this is a bona fide study that was conducted by Harvard Business Review of the best producers in the world. And so that's a fact. So just because you're a top producer in one place doesn't mean you're going to be a top producer somewhere else. Too much of your success oftentimes is due to the environment you're selling within. It's not really in your control. With the wins model, you'll be able to take control. It doesn't matter what environment you're selling in. One of the reasons selling for venture-backed startups was important for me was because I was selling something that people had never heard of to solve a problem they didn't know they had. I was selling something that we had no customers, we had no use case. Oftentimes I had no product that actually worked. The wins model is designed to help you sell in that and be successful in that environment. Annual turnover of salespeople is often 2 to 3 times higher than the general workforce, right? That's because oftentimes folks don't know how to hire us for the right fit, but it's also because we take the wrong jobs. And that's another Harvard Business Review statistic. Successful salespeople win just 46% of their forecast deals. That's a current statistic from the folks at Sales Mastery. Worse than placing a pass bet at a Vegas craps table of 49.3%. So we're still losing more than half the deals that we think we're going to close, gang. That's just not scalable. The wins model will help you break that. The wins model will help you get to a 91% forecast accuracy rate. And then the big number down here, on average, sales forces are overstaffed by 2 to 3 times. What does it mean when a sales organization is staffed with sales folks who aren't achieving their goals and objectives? In order to grow, the sales organization thinks they have to hire more salespeople. Well, guess what? If you hire more salespeople and you spread the opportunity among more folks, you're decreasing their ability to hit their number, right? You're spending more money and you're getting less return. So it's not scalable. So what do we have to do? We have to invest in training, the right training. So you can't go out and hire top performers anymore, gang. Especially if we have managers or CEOs on the phone today, you have to hire the best possible folks that you can find and then develop those top performers. And the good news is they'll be a top performer for you, but you'll also be building a skill set in your employee that they can take with them throughout their career. And that's the promise of the wins model. So I'm going to give you something to think about. I want to give you an image to think about when you think about the transactional trap. This is the trap that every single one of you falls into at some point in time during your week, your month, your year. And it's the trap I can fall into if I'm not thoughtful about it, because after all, we're only human, right? We're not perfect all the time. The transactional trap is actually created by the consultative sales training that you've had in the past, right? Every one of you probably thinks of yourself as being consultative. You might have taken consultative sales training course. You may have taken a relational sales training course or a value-based sales training or strategic training, right? Strategic selling, which is offered by Miller Hyman, spin selling, conceptual selling, solution selling, customer-centric selling, the challenger sale, the latest book that I've heard about, gap selling. Every one of these methodologies positions you to fall into the transactional trap. The challenge is, the challenge that this creates for you guys is that you fall into the transactional trap even after you've given your amazing you've led this amazing consultative conversation. I'll ask the rhetorical question here, something for you guys to think about. Have you ever been pulled into a feature or price conversation after a strong consultative start, right? You run a great discovery call, right? They're being very open. You're identifying all kinds of opportunities and challenges, and then at the end of that conversation, what happens? They just naturally ask you, so tell me about you. What's your solution like? And then guess what? You fall into the trap. Because at that point, when you begin talking about your stuff, you're actually pitching. And when you start to pitch, you stand opposed to the buyer. Now you're beginning to destroy all the great work you did building that consultative experience for them. And now you start to pitch. And now they start to get ready to be skeptical. And as you pitch, you stand opposed from that buyer, and now they're being defensive and they're looking for reasons why not to believe you, why not to buy from you. And the challenge with that pitch is that when you're done, they can't say yes. All they can do is say, interesting, thank you very much, and go shop because you haven't given them anything to think about. So the pitch produces a reaction from the buyer that says, okay, that's an interesting opportunity, an interesting solution. Let me go compare that to some others. If they come back, then you give them the proposal, you're giving them a price. What do they do after they get your price? They have to go shop it because they have nothing to compare to. How do I know you're charging the right price? They don't have a value proposition yet to compare it to, a real value prop that they value, not one that you give them like an ROI statement. ROI is meaningless in most cases, in most B2B conversations. It's about the value the buyer attributes to your offering. So now they have to go shop again. Another reason why you're being ghosted, another reason why they don't respond to your proposals. And then if they come back because your product compares favorably and because your price compares favorably, now you're going to defend. Now you're going to negotiate terms and they're going to cut you down because they know you've been waiting a long time for their business. You've likely forecasted it. They know they have the edge and the leverage on you. So in most cases, gang, the consultative tools you've learned have only gotten you a little bit of the way. They're a great place to start. They're a terrible place to end. And we end up with our pitch, propose, defend um, sales cycle that we just repeat over and over again. We find new ways of deploying it. We read new books and we build new PowerPoint presentations, but they don't help. So I'd like to ask you guys, is it possible that your process is creating the trap uh, that you're experiencing? Just think about it. In 100% of the cases of the companies that I've worked with, over the 7,500 plus companies I've worked with, the 27,000 salespeople I worked with, 100% of the cases, it's the training and it's the manifestation of that training and the process they follow that creates the trap that we're trying to escape. So buyers can't agree to your solution until they agree to their problem. What I'd like you guys to be thinking about is that your goal when you're selling is not to get to your solution. Your goal is to get to the buyer's problem. And what I'd like to just share with you is a little bit of insight into the training, and then I'm going to open this up for more questions. Um, Someone who deploys the wins model or who operates as a growth multiplier is much more knowledgeable, much more focused on the buyer's problem. And instead of pitching, proposing, and defending, their process is interview, educate, recommend, right? So we're interviewing instead of pitching. And by virtue of the interview, we're turning that buyer, that human being, into a champion of change. They're going to become our champion of change inside the organization. We're not going to, we're not just going to stop there. We're going to then educate them, not on our solution, but on their problem. So after the interview, we spend time really helping them understand the value and the implications of the problem for them personally, as well as for their organization. We're never losing focus on the human being in front of us, again, because we want to turn them into that champion of change. And then by virtue of the fact that we're understanding them, we're building trust with them, we're also building respect because we're treating them differently than every other salesperson is treating them. And that respect earns us the right to make a recommendation. We no longer give proposals, gang. We don't propose. A proposal is an optional thing that buyers collect and compare. There's no commitment attached to a proposal. There is a commitment attached to a recommendation. Because once I educate them on their problem, I'm going to ask them if they would like my help. And then when they say yes, I'm going to present them with a strong recommendation. And it's either going to be a yes or no, and that's it. No messing around. That recommendation will maybe it may be taken in the call or taken within a week of that call, but I know when I give that recommendation how long it's going to take for them to say yes, and I know exactly who's going to be involved in saying yes or no. So it's wonderful about this process, gang. You may be skeptical as to whether it works or not. We have some great folks from the Chamber of Commerce who've been through this and who have achieved significant success inside a year. But what happens here is because you treat buyers differently, you're helping them buy versus showing up as a salesperson. You're helping them see what they can get out of their relationship with you instead of thinking about what you can get out of them. Buyers actually pull you through their buying cycle. So you're cultivating buying energy. You're not you're not having to bring that urgency, that selling energy to the table, right? Which when buyers experience it, it's indicative of that commission breath that we don't want to have. Any comments or questions? I know that we're about 54 minutes in. I want to open this up to anyone who has a comment or question before I take a few minutes to wrap up.
I have a question. How would you
Melissa.
recommend for someone to um be able to position themselves if the company already has established relationships with individuals they've worked with over the years, or you're competing against someone who has been established or well known, like big consultant companies and things like that?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Every human being on the planet, right? We're just think about human beings, think about yourselves. Every human being has a job to do and has made a commitment to their employer to do that job well. Um, there's nobody who has gotten to a decision-making role in an organization that got there by ignoring trends, by putting their head in the sand, by being complacent. At some level, they're all curious. So your job is simply if you want to just get that first meeting with a buyer who has a, let's say they have the industry leading incumbent as their partner, and you want that meeting. It may not happen on the first call, but the mindset for you is, look, you're not looking to make a sale on that first call. You're simply looking to get them curious about change, to get them curious about what they may be missing out on. So the way that when we make cold calls, gang, we'll make 40 calls and we'll speak to 4 people and we'll get one meeting. Cold calls work really well, but the only reason they work is because when I have a chance to speak to somebody, I'm talking about the frustrations that we eliminate for our customers. So when I speak to a CEO like you, Becky, I had a conversation with someone recently. When we speak to CEOs like you, Becky, we oftentimes hear them talk about the frustration of not being able to help their salespeople get to decision makers. I wonder if you experience that frustration yourself. She's like, yeah, okay. Tell me more about it. Just by talking about a frustration that they have that I know that they're experiencing, we've made a connection. That decision maker is not going to let me go. Why? Because there's a little piece of her that says, James gets me, right? Not James is smooth sales guy. James gets me. I want every buyer to understand how well I understand them. If you guys think of yourselves, if you meet somebody who really understands the problem that you're experiencing, aren't you going to have more faith in their ability to solve it? And when someone says to me, hey, James, if Becky had said to me, hey, James, what do you sell and how much? I'm ready to buy. I'm like, Becky, I would love to give you a price once I can make a strong recommendation. Do you mind if I ask you a few more questions? Even if she's writing the check and giving it to me, I'm pushing it back. because in my heart, I know my goal is her goal, a successful buying decision. I'm not going to take that check until I know I can make a strong recommendation that serves her well. That's a level of commitment to my buyer that none of my competitors have. Right? Does that resonate, Marissa?
Yes.
And during the training, gang, we'll have plenty of time to address specific challenges that you bring to the table. You'll have time to go test them out. You'll have time to bring those back to the training and go through the coaching, and we'll work on those together. So this is not like going through a bunch of videos and then having to figure it out yourself. We'll be handling the problems that you bring to the session, and we'll be making sure that you can execute those in the field.
James, I know our time is dwindling, but we do have 3 questions in the chat.
Sure.
The first one is, what do you recommend if buyers don't feel that they have a problem?
Yeah. Who on this call is perfect? Who knows anyone who's perfect? Who knows anyone who has everything they ever wanted? Okay, guys, look, if you meet someone who is telling you they don't have a problem, right? You know it's not true. What could it possibly be? Right? This goes back to my conversation with Marissa. When they look at you, do they think of you as somebody who really gets them? Probably not. Your job is to impress upon them how well you understand them. When we send out cold emails, the cold emails that we send out are emails that in the first paragraph speak to a frustration that we know or that we have a high probability of expecting that buyer to have. We're talking about the things that they care most about, the frustrations, the changes that they would make if only they knew someone they trusted to make those changes. That's your job. Your job is not to know how your product works. Your job is not to be able to pitch more effectively, more faster, more accurately. Your job is to help the buyer understand themselves at a deeper level. And it starts with, right? How well do you understand their business? How well do you understand them as a buyer? How well do you know the must-haves that you serve? And how good are you at qualifying those, but also how good are you at talking about them, getting other folks to talk about them?
Okay, we have another one. How does the Columbus Wins model work with long versus short sales cycles?
Beautiful. So the wins model, we will teach you a 5-question close. So we've worked with retailers, for example, that sell big ticket items, where somebody will come into the store to spend $100,000 on a automated home system. And we can work through the model can work really well in a one-call close. It can work well over a multi-stage process. Typically, complex sales are defined by the complexity of the buying center. The more people in the buying center, the longer the sales cycle, typically. So if that's something that you're experiencing, that's definitely going to be part of the training and definitely easily addressed with the WINS program.
Okay, and the last one we have here is, when you approach the prospect may have not identified a problem or recognized the need for change. What is the best approach if making to make the prospect a champion for change?
Yeah. Look, when um, I did a lot of work selling technology, and oftentimes a lot of times technology is bought by, or at least shopped by, people who we would consider to be a technical evaluator, somebody at a lower level in the organization who's going to go out and search the web for potential solutions. And then those folks are going to screen vendors and present maybe a smaller list to their boss. So the question there is like, how do you turn that person into a champion, right? So you really have to take an interest in them. And that's a classic opportunity because that person that's building the list and maybe putting together the RFP, et cetera, they have a lot at stake. And most salespeople will treat them with disdain. Most salespeople ignore them. I show them a lot of attention. I show them a lot of love. And I want to find out what's in it for them. What does success look like for them? And how can I help them achieve that success? And I do that by simply asking personal questions, right? So I can ask them a question like, why change? Why is change important to the organization? And is change something that's important to you? What's the risk of change for the organization? What's the risk of change for you? I want to understand what's in it for them. I've oftentimes asked buyers, is the decision that you make potentially going to impact your compensation? And they might say, in what way, James? And I might say, well, look, I mean, is any of your compensation tied to commissions? Any of your compensation tied to company performance? Is any of your compensation tied to stock performance? Yes. Tell me about that. Is it possible that this decision could affect your pocketbook? Yes. Okay. Is it possible this decision could affect the size of your team? How do you feel about losing team members? Terrible. Okay, great. So it sounds like the right solution would be one where we preserve your team, where our value prop isn't built around getting rid of employees. Is that would that be a priority for you? Yes. Okay, well, then it sounds like if we're going to work well together, part of my job is to make sure that doesn't happen. If I can make that commitment to you, is that something that would that be important to you? Important enough to help introduce me to the decision maker? Absolutely, James. Happy to do it. So it starts with you having the interest, and then it continues with you knowing the right questions to ask and really making the conversation all about the person in front of you, in addition to addressing the larger problem that they also care about, the larger corporate issue or organizational issue. Any other questions?
That's all we have in the chat.
Okay.
We have about 7 minutes.
All right, dynamite. Well, I'll wrap up, gang. And if anything pops up in the meantime, let me know. A lot of the stuff, I'm going to try to give you some more detail insight into the training itself and the methodology that we will be walking you through. You've already seen this idea of how we oppose this idea of pitch, propose, defend with interview, educate, recommend. And this will inform your process, but it could also inform your corporate process. What I'm going to do is just share with you a little bit about the WINS model. We talk about the WINS model being the world's first servant leader centric conversation model for sales and customer facing teams. And all I really want to share with you now is I want you to see a picture of the model. And you can see this online, either on my site or other sites around on the web. But I really want to explain it to you so you can go apply it today. So when we think about this idea that buyers can't say yes to your solution until they first, or they can't agree to your solution to buy your solution until they agree that they have a problem. I want you guys to think about how important that is, right? If you've ever made a sale really, really quickly and you're really not sure why the buyer is buying, it's because they already know what their problem is and they have a good sense that your solution is going to make it happen. But in cases where the buyer is unsure, it's your job to help them understand the problem that's in front of them. And the power of the WINS model is that we start by defining the buyer's problem and seeking agreement to that problem. And that's how we develop those champions of change. So the WINS model is holistically based on driving 4 agreements: wants, impacts, needs, and solutions. So your job is to first understand the buyer's wants. In other words, why change? And to expose the impact of getting or not getting what they want. So this is where we have that conversation around the outcomes that they seek. How is their life going to be different, right? Based on the change, achieving the change they seek. Wants and impacts, and then needs. So once we understand the wants and impacts, what I want to understand are the needs in the context of those wants and impacts. And what's powerful about the WINS model is after I ask those three questions and have that conversation and gain the client's agreement, we've actually defined their problem. Their problem is the win. So think about this in the context of how you operate today. If your discovery is really only about identifying needs, people don't buy because they need things. I'm sure you guys could walk around your homes today and identify a number of things that need to be changed, but they are not. Why aren't they being changed? Because they're not a priority yet. What makes them a priority? It has to be a desire or a frustration that's too big to ignore, something I want that's too big to ignore. The impact of success, failure, or doing nothing has to be too big to ignore. And then, of course, the need becomes too big to ignore when the wants and impacts are identified and understood, right? So oftentimes when you all are selling something to someone that isn't resonating with them and they view you as a nice to have, it's because they really don't understand the value of making that decision today. They don't understand the priority of that decision because you haven't walked them through that. We're going to show you a very simple programmatic way to have these conversations in 5 minutes, in two meetings, 3 meetings. Our standard sales process is very short. It's three conversations. We can shrink that or we can make it bigger depending on the nature of what you sell. But we will cut your sales cycle times dramatically by virtue of using this methodology. And once we understand the win and we have agreement to the win or to the buyer's problem, then it's a natural thing to ask them if they'd like our help solving it. When they say yes, we present our solution as our strong recommendation. Because we've established our expertise by helping them understand their win, their real problem, it's natural for them to see the value in our recommendation of our ideal solution. So the sale is really made, gang, by virtue of helping the buyer truly understand the challenges in front of them. And by investing your time there, by having the patience and investing your time up front in understanding the buyer's real problem, you'll accelerate their decision to solution. You'll virtually eliminate negotiation. And we'll show you how to do all that through the program. At a high level, gang, what you're doing here by talking about wants and impacts, you're actually having that value-based conversation, but you're defining the buyer's definition of value. Every buyer you work with will have their own definition. It's a mistake to think that ROI is going to get you anywhere in a complex sale. It's much more personal than that. And I want to encourage you to think about that. And I want to encourage you to think about, as you help someone understand the value you can bring to them, guess what happens? You become their emotional favorite. And we all know that buying decisions are made first with our hearts and then with our heads. If you guys are only having needs-based conversations, then you're having conversations that occur below the power line, and you're just going to be subject to the same old transactional sales process, the same low win rates, and you're going to continue to deal with price objections, feature function objections, and you're going to continue to kind of wallow in this transactional sales world where you don't have to be. As long as you can learn how to have conversations above the power line with every buyer that you meet in the buying center. Okay, gang, I'm going to wrap it there. Thanks for sticking with me, gang. Any questions before we wrap and you continue with your Friday? Well, I'll let you know while you're thinking about it. I'm available uh, after today if you want to reach out to me at james@jamesrores.com. That's Rores is my last name. Happy to hear from you. If you want to reach me through the chamber, you can do that too. If you want to chat with some of the sales folks at the chamber that have in the membership group that have worked with me for the last year and a half, you can check with them, and I'm sure they'll give you some great insights into what the experience was like. We may not be for everyone, gang, but Columbus wins. It works, and we stand behind it, and I would be thrilled to have you join us.